Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for The Unholy. What The Unholy is essentially about is basically center on this journalist, Gary Fenn. He is this journalist that's grown a bit disgruntled. He really has not had a successful story in quite a bit, but one day he stumbles upon this curse of sorts that he really doesn't understand, and very quickly after he ends up demolishing it, he finds out that this girl, Alice, that has been mute all along, has suddenly, and deaf, has suddenly been given the gift where she no longer is. And after this happens, Alice turns into a healer of sorts, and this, at what at first seems like a very compelling story, Fenn starts to realize there might be a deeper and darker conspiracy going on here, potentially involving the Virgin Mary and her getting her revenge on what really happened to her so many years ago. And so now he really does have to get to the bottom of things and try to figure out if this really is worth publishing and how he can really go about it, if there is a more demonic force at play. So The Unholy overall, I was actually looking forward to this movie, and that's surprising to me considering that it is a horror film. It looks like one from the poster alone that would normally come out in January, so you wouldn't think this is a film I'd normally be excited for, but this one actually interested me because it looked like something really different. It looked like a film that was going in a different direction than we normally do get with films like this. It was exploring a very interesting conflict, and I thought it could be presented really well if they execute it well. So I finally did see it, and it's not that great. The Unholy isn't a bad film per se, but overall, it kind of feels like a nothing movie. This is a film that has so much potential, and there's so many good ideas, but it really doesn't deliver on most of them, and unfortunately is one of the more frustrating watches that I have seen in quite a bit. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. I gotta be honest, this already is one of the biggest issues with this movie, which is surprising because you look at this cast and there's a lot of great actors in here. There's a lot of people that you know are very talented, but starting right off here with Jeffrey Dean Morgan, I mean, he's probably one of the biggest draws going into this movie. People probably expect him to give a really strong performance, and I thought at least, if the film wasn't good, that Morgan would give a strong performance here because he's an amazing actor. But I don't know if Jeffrey Dean Morgan was just kind of over this film, but it really did not translate in the way that he wanted to. I get that this character is supposed to be very cynical. I get that there's not a lot that is supposed to faze him. He will often make jokes about things that he shouldn't. He is a non-believer and things like that, and you do understand that, but overall, this just feels like a very half-assed performance. It really did not feel like Morgan was into this role. It really felt like he was just kind of going through the motions throughout a lot of it, and for a role that is supposed to feel very enlightening, and one that goes through a pretty big transformation in the second half, it just doesn't feel natural. It didn't feel like much had really changed, and that's unfortunate considering that this is a character that is supposed to be going through a lot, but it never really feels like Morgan is willing to go there, which is really weird. His performance overall feels very off, and I can't believe I'm saying this about Jeffrey Dean Morgan because he normally gives a really strong performance, but here it just really did not work. It rang a lot more hollow than I expected it to, and I think is definitely one of the weaker points of this film. Someone who I did really like, though, is Cricket Brown, who does, of course, play the character of Alice, and does a pretty good job at doing so, may I say. I mean, I haven't really seen this actress much before, but she does a really good job of showing that this is someone that has been affected with this gift, but doesn't really know how to go about it. Seeing her go from someone who can't hear and is experiencing all of these things, she does do a really good job with. You get the sense that she's able to do things in her life that she wasn't able to, and just how how overjoyed she really is by this gift. She does give a very convincing performance there, but you also do realize that there's a lot that Alice is experiencing that she doesn't fully understand. And Brown overall, when all else fails, she really is the standout performance of this entire movie. It feels very convincing, it feels very natural, and it very much does feel like she goes through a legitimate transformation in this film. And I really did like how she ended up portraying this role. Like I said, I really haven't seen this actress much before, but I really hope I do after this movie, because I think she's got a lot of potential in her for sure. She by far was the best part of this movie for me. As far as the rest of the cast goes, I think everyone does as good of a job as they could. Diogo Morgado, I thought, was actually really good as the Monsignor. He's someone that is a bit more of a skeptic in this film. He isn't quite sure what's actually going on, but where his character ended up going, I thought he did a really good job with it, and definitely was someone that kept me very invested within the film. William Sadler is good here too. Cary Elwes, let's talk about him. I was very on and off with him as an actor, where I know that Elwes is someone that, is naturally British and things like that, but the Boston accent in this film, it just really doesn't work in the way that I think he wants it to. It feels very phony. At points, it's almost cartoony. I found myself laughing at it at points, and I just don't think it got the necessary impact that it needed to, so I really did not think he delivered as much as he could have. And then Katie Aselton is fine here. She's definitely putting more effort into the film than Jeffrey Dean Morgan is, but there just isn't really a lot to her. So overall, I think the cast is good for what they have for the most part, but most of them didn't really do enough to fully elevate this film for me. Now we gotta get to the things that really do bring this film down, which is the directing and the writing. And right off the bat, I think the directing is really the biggest issue with this entire film, aside from a few other things. Evan Spiliotopoulos, he is someone that hasn't really directed a movie before. You look at his filmography, he's done a lot of like Disney direct-to-DVD sequels, but he hasn't really directed them. He's done like screenplay material and things like that. This is really the first film he's directed, and it really does show. This is not a very impressive directorial debut, very much at all. His biggest issue, I think, is the tone in this movie. He really doesn't know if he wants this to be a psychological thriller or if he wants it to be fully horror, and I think that really is the biggest issue here. I think he needed it to not be a horror film. When he starts to rely on the horror a lot, it just doesn't work in the way that he really wants it to. I think the film overall feels a lot more generic than it should, and I think if it was more of a psychological thriller, I think this film would honestly be a lot better. You could really dive into the idea of how conflicted some of these characters are with their faith, if they actually believe what is going on here, but the film really wants to be more of this possession horror film, and it doesn't really work in the way that it wants to. And you also never really feel the urgency throughout this entire movie. It feels very standard in terms of directing, and I think we needed a much better director to really elevate this material, to really show you just how dire a lot of what just how dire this conflict really is, just what is really going on here, because I never felt any real tension throughout this movie, and I think it really is at the fault of Spiliotopoulos here. I think he could have done a much better job with directing this movie, and it did not really work in the way that he wanted it to. The writing as well in this film is really not good. Look, I will say, the premise of this film is one that I really do like. I think there's a lot of potential for what you can really do, but I think easily the biggest issue with this movie has to be its lead character. Jeffrey Dean Morgan's performance aside, this is easily one of the most unlikable lead characters that I've seen in quite a bit. In a lot of horror films where you have that character that is this journalist, and he just wants to exploit tragedies. He just wants to exploit certain things that are going on, and you realize he's only really doing it for monetary gain. There's really no other reason for him besides that. most of the time, that's someone that is in the film for a little bit and then either dies or, like, goes away later on. He is someone that is very much in the background. Well, unfortunately, that's the main character of this film, and it really doesn't work. As a character, Fen is just very much lacking here. You get the sense that he doesn't really care all that much about this. He really just wants a good story as a journalist, and the problem isn't so much that he isn't likable as a character, because he's not. It's the fact that it doesn't really feel like he changes much, and script-wise, it seems like he very much does. He is someone who starts off the film, and again, he definitely doesn't have that religious faith that he should. It very much seems like he has deviated away from that. He's very much doubting his faith, and he just doesn't really believe in a lot of this stuff. And you understand that. You understand the fact that he's very disillusioned by all of this, and he's just very cynical in that way. But the problem is, as a character, there just really isn't a lot to Fen. You understand he hasn't had a successful story in quite a few years, and this is finally something that could really put him on top, but it never really feels like it goes deeper than that. We don't really get to see a scene where he's, like, weighing out the consequences of what could really go on here. It quite literally goes from him not really caring to suddenly this being the most important thing to him, and it just doesn't feel like a natural shift. It doesn't really feel like this character went in a went in a natural direction. It feels like a lot of the development that this character needed, the film just really didn't dive into, and I found that to be very frustrating as a viewer. I needed a lot more with Fen. I needed a lot more to his character, and the film just wasn't really willing to go there. And the problem is, every other character in this film is so much more interesting than him. Alice, especially, is a really good character. You really do get to see her emerge from someone that has had limited access to things throughout her life because of her visual and hearing because of her hearing impairments, and finally get to explore the depths of that, but also her turning into this savior of sorts, and whether or not that's good or bad, if what she is really following is something that she should be getting behind. But you also get the sense that she doesn't really care because she likes the fact that she does have actual purpose, and I think the film really does dive into that very well when it comes to her character. But again, the movie is so focused on Fen. It wants to focus on his relationship with Alice, which just doesn't feel genuine, and the film acts like it is. The film acts like this is a very genuine relationship, and it just doesn't really feel that way, and I don't think that they do a very good job with that at all. So already you have a lot of issues when it comes to the characters, but the mythology in this movie as well is just not very interesting. You start off the film and you think it's going to go somewhere really interesting when it comes to what ended up happening to the Virgin Mary and things like that. You want to dive deeper into it, and when it's eventually revealed, it's just very predictable. We've seen this done better in a lot of movies, and the film just doesn't really do a lot to get you behind it. It was one of those things where when they started to double down on the horror element more, I was honestly taken aback by the fact that the movie was already going there, because it feels like we rushed through a lot of story. We rushed through a lot of interesting elements here that I think would have only enhanced the story. It would have made the film a lot better, but they really didn't do that. It also doesn't help that so much of this film feels like a traditional horror movie, in the sense where it is so reliant on jump scares, it is so reliant on this horrible CGI imagery, and it just isn't something that I really enjoyed watching. I found it to be very annoying. I really was never scared throughout this entire movie, and the film really wants me to be. The film wants you to be so invested in what's going on. I just, for the life of me, couldn't, mainly because of the fact that the story was already very subpar, but The scares as well are just really not there, and they don't do a very good job with it. So overall, I just found this to be a very messily handled screenplay. There's a lot of characters in here as well I struggled to figure out the purpose of. Cary Elwes' character especially, I don't understand what his character is. He starts off and it seems like he is someone that is embracing his faith, and he's someone that really cares about what Alice is doing, but then you realize there might be a more hidden agenda to him, and then maybe there's not, and I didn't understand what they were trying to do with this character. It felt like he changed from scene to scene, and it wasn't in a way where it starts to peel back the layers of him. It legitimately felt like it was a different character every single scene that they showed him, and I just don't think they did a very strong job with that. So yeah, writing overall, it just really is not great here, and I don't think they did a very good job with it. Very much at all. Like I said, cinematography wise, the film isn't bad. The look and the feel of things are fine, but the CGI, when we start to see this character more, it just does not look that great. It looks very subpar, and I understand a lot of this film they had to make through COVID and things like that, but they had a lot of time to improve upon these things, and they just didn't really do that. And because the fact that the film is so CGI heavy, it's constantly cutting to these just weird shots of who knows what the fuck is supposed to be going on, it just really took me out of the movie, and I found it very hard to stay compelled in what was going on. The score here I thought was actually kind of good. I did enjoy the score that Joseph Bishara did. He did a good job with that, but also the editing to this movie. I just think this movie is way too short. I think we needed a lot more time to fully dive into these characters, to fully dive into this conflict, maybe develop the relation between Fen and Alice a bit more, dive into his main conflict, the idea of, you know, is what I'm doing ethical, or is there something more demonic at play and I need to not cut this story? It just feels like the film is in such a rush to get to what is happening. And my other biggest issue with the movie is when we get to the ending, a lot of it just feels very underwhelming. It's one of those things where you know it's going to go somewhere, and when it eventually does, you just find yourself being like, oh, okay, that's it? Like, I was legitimately shocked when the movie ended. I could not believe we were already at the third act. It felt like the film was just rushing through basically any potential that it had. Anything interesting that it could have dived into, the film just kind of rushed through, and there were a lot of decisions that were made that I just didn't really like. There were a lot of things I think they could have dived deeper into, and they just really didn't. Overall, I think The Unholy is a film that had a lot of potential. It has a lot of really good ideas, but it doesn't know how to utilize them. It doesn't focus on the things that it really should. It does have a pretty good performance from Cricket Brown, and it does have some interesting ideas in there, but ultimately, it just feels way too generic. All of the things that I think could have made it a compelling sort of psychological thriller feels a lot more just like a generic horror movie that we normally do see, and it just feels very tiring. We've seen this so many times before, and I don't think this film really does do enough that is different here. It's a film that I really did want to like, but overall, the more it went on, the more it just really was annoying me in how lazily done a lot of it is. This is a very underwhelming film, and I'm going to give The Unholy overall a C-. Over, guys, in my review of The Unholy. Let me know what you guys saw this movie. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.